She did not shout. She did not perform for the cameras. But in a city of noise, one silent act of truth stirred something that nobody expected. If you've ever wondered what real leadership feels like, this story is for you. Press play to jump in. It began with a whisper, not a headline, a gentle vow in a room filled with static. She wasn't seeking power, applause, or cameras, only the truth. But when in a world where the truth appears to be a risk, what does it do when one woman tells it? Clearly, calmly, without blinking? Have we forgotten what real courage looks like? What it feels like to be led, not managed? This is the tale of one moment that turned into a movement. Let's start. At a high-powered event teeming with power players, nobody saw it coming. Former Press Secretary Jen Psaki took a shot at her successor, Karoline Leavitt, right in front of the cameras. The room, packed with hundreds of politicians and press, fell into stunned silence as Psaki returned a swift, stinging barb. It was brazen. It was public. And it looked like it could leave Leavitt stumbling. But Karoline didn't flinch. Instead, she was completely calm, cool as ice. And then, in one simple sentence, she flipped the moment upside down. Psaki was left without words. The crowd, a buzz. That single line would go on to rock the very foundations of conservative politics. But before we dive into what happened next, drop a comment below where you're tuning in from, and be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of these uplifting behind-the-scenes stories. The setting was Washington, D.C.'s National Press Club, a grandiose room with glittering chandeliers and the steady hum of cameras capturing every word. It was supposed to be a standard press conference, tightly scripted with rehearsed questions and prepared answers. Top reporters, seasoned politicians, and curious onlookers had gathered to hear from the White House. Minutes earlier, President Donald Trump had concluded addressing a thunderous applause. Then Karoline Leavitt, press secretary, stepped up to take questions on a new tariff policy. She introduced herself before she was cut off mid-sentence by a voice out of nowhere that pierced the air. It was Jen Psaki. The former Biden press secretary turned high-profile MSNBC host had somehow wound her way to the mic without an invitation. Her voice cut through the air, her tone sharp with sarcasm. "Let's stop pretending," she spoke, her eyes on Karoline. "We all know Karoline Leavitt isn't a real spokesman. She's Trump's script-reading puppet." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters froze. Politicians shifted in their seats. Cameras zoomed in. All eyes were on the two women. Leavitt stood motionless, her face unreadable. Across from her, Psaki wore a smug smile, convinced she'd just scored the final word. "You have no voice, Karoline?" Psaki went on, her tone sharp as ever. "You're just parroting Trump, hoping for a scrap of his spotlight." The air thickened. Not even the security detail moved. Everyone froze. Then, slowly and deliberately, Karoline Leavitt stepped forward. She didn't scream. She didn't point fingers. Rather, she spoke low, barely above a whisper, but somehow her words sliced clean through the silence like a knife. That's when things started to shift. Leavitt looked Psaki straight in the eye. Her voice was calm but powerful, the kind that makes you lean in just to catch every word. "Jen," she said, "if loyalty to the truth makes me a puppet, then what does that make you?" A storyteller for those who twist America into something it's not. A wave of murmur swept the room. A glass broke loudly as someone dropped one at the back. Tension crackled like static. Psaki's aggressive smile slipped. Leavitt was not done, though. "I stand with a president who puts Americans first," she continued. "And you follow left-wing media that's always willing to smear the very values you once pretended to uphold." Her voice wasn't loud, but every word appeared to have substance, to be weighed. Reporters were scribbling away. People leaned forward in their seats, their eyes wide. "You call me a puppet?" Leavitt continued, her voice even. And yet you tremble at the media's terror. I tremble at the truth. And unlike you, I have never turned my back on this country's people." Psaki's lips twitched. She opened her mouth as if to reply, but nothing came out. Then the quiet broke. Applause, light at first, started from one corner of the room, then spread. Louder, stronger, a spark of something bigger. Backstage, President Trump gave a small, knowing nod. This wasn't just a verbal spat anymore. It had turned into a symbolic showdown. Two visions for the future, clashing in real time. Psaki spun, trying to flee the moment. Her footsteps hurried, but Karoline wasn't finished. "You want to talk about honesty, Jen?" she said, her voice still level, still calm. But her words were sharpened, like truth whittled to a blade. "Where were you?" Karoline Leavitt questioned, her voice steady and firm. "When Biden's inflation had Americans battling just to put food on the table? When the media warped truth? When families lost their jobs?" Her words hung in the air like a thick cloud. "You gave speeches," she said, glancing at Psaki, "polished, practiced ones, while real Americans suffered. The cameras recorded it all, every word, every pause, every glance. Live streams tallied over 2 million viewers, and within that room you could feel the turning point." Psaki confronted her once more. Her voice broke. "You don't know how hard it is to be press secretary," she said quietly. "No," Karoline said this time with unmistakable edge. "You don't know what it means to hold a line." She looked out into the room, at the media, at the politicians, at the people viewing in from all angles. "Leadership," she said, "is not about chasing applause or dodging responsibility. It is about doing what is right, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular." There was no bitterness in her voice, just conviction, a quiet kind of strength that didn't need to shout. "That's something you used to believe in," she added, "before you traded your reputation for approval from people who never had any respect for you in the first place." Psaki's face drained of color. She looked like someone who'd just enjoyed the full weight of the moment, and then dropped the final bomb. "You were once the press secretary, Jen," said Karoline. "Now you're a mouthpiece for individuals tearing America apart, and history will not remember that fondly." You could feel the sting, not just in Psaki, but across the room. It wasn't just a compelling moment. It was as if something broke. The audience wasn't just shocked now. They looked shaken. Some of them whispered to each other. Reporters huddled to compare notes. Some members of the audience glanced at each other and seemed to say, "Did that really just happen?" Psaki was frozen at the podium, knowing that she'd walked right into a firestorm, and might not come out the same. Karoline Leavitt stepped forward. Slowly, gracefully. She turned to the audience, then directly into the camera lens. "This isn't about me," she said, calm but steady. "The truth is, some people once held the title of press secretary, but they sold the soul of that role just to keep their dinner invitations from the other side." Psaki's jaw tightened. Her eyes darted to a corner of the room where a group of political donors sat. Some of them had quietly turned away, avoiding eye contact, but Karoline was not finished. "You didn't just betray President Trump," Karoline said, her voice even but passionate. "You betrayed each and every one of the voters who trusted you to fight for them, even when it was hard." In the crowd, a young woman suddenly began to cry. She'd lost her job in Biden's inflation wave, while Jen Psaki came on television, self-assured in her clothing, refined words in her rhetoric. To her, Leavitt's words resonated. Karoline addressed the room. "This party isn't perfect," she said, honesty in her voice. "But we don't need traitors. We need warriors, and I won't stand by while someone who ran from the fight tries to rewrite history." The room exploded. Applause thundered through the room. The energy had completely shifted, and Psaki looked visibly smaller, overwhelmed by the moment. She took a deep breath and tried to respond, her voice shaking. "Do you honestly believe you understand the experience of being in my position?" Psaki said. "You've never stood there, Karoline. You have no idea of the pressure, the insanity." I do, Karoline interrupted, cool and assured. And I've stood my ground. The room was quiet again. You could almost hear hearts pounding. Psaki's hand rose, and she pointed at Karoline with shaking fingers. You're a political novice, she told him. You're clinging to Trump's name. I built my credibility. You're walking in shoes you didn't earn. Karoline's lips tightened. Her eyes grew cold, and when she replied, her voice was low but steel-edged. The difference is, I never spat in the face of the one who gave me those shoes. A murmur of comment rippled through the crowd like a wave. Karoline took another step forward. You walked around like you had the weight of the world on your shoulders, she said. A statement, and not an accusation. But when the time really mattered, you let the media write the ending. You handed them the pen. Some nodded. The reality of her words fell quietly but heavily. Then a man wearing a veteran's cap stood up. He began to clap, alone at first. Then, one by one, others stood and clapped too. The applause wasn't for what was said anymore. It was for what it meant. Karoline looked around the room one last time. Leadership isn't fleeing from pain, she said. It's standing in the middle of it, and still saying, I won't back down. Jen Psaki had no comment. She looked like someone who had aged 10 years in the span of 10 minutes. Like the weight of past choices had finally caught up with her. Jen Psaki tried to smile, but it never reached her eyes. It was the kind of smile you wear when you know that you're losing the room and can't do anything to stop it. Then Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, calmly, and pulled out a small USB drive from her pocket. This, she went on, holding it up between her fingers, is a tape of your MSNBC show. The one where you debunked Biden's inflation, while Americans by the millions couldn't afford basic groceries. Gasps ran through the crowd. One reporter in the front row jumped to his feet, camera shutter clicking wildly. Psaki's eyes bulged. That's disinformation, she shrieked, her voice cracking slightly. Karoline's voice was cold and even. No, she said, it's verified. I checked myself. Transparency isn't treason, Jen. Smiling while you lie, that is. She stepped forward and placed the USB delicately on the podium. This isn't revenge. This is truth. The American people deserve to know who you've become. There was no sound. No coughs, no whispers, just stillness. Psaki lowered her head, her shoulders drooping. Words failed her. And it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind that says everything without needing a word. It felt final. Backstage, President Trump leaned toward an aide and whispered, she just ended Psaki's career. Because in that moment, the truth wasn't just spoken. It was seen. And the room felt it. The silence soon turned into a whispering murmur. Seat by seat, people leaned forward, whispering. She has proof. Did Jen really say that? Why would she deny what we all went through? Karoline didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She actually looked grave, like someone who'd just done something she had to do, but heavy, like truth, when it hurts even you to tell it. Psaki backed away slowly from the microphone. Her face had gone pale. She dug into her pocket with one hand, but there was nothing there. Habit, maybe. Or nerves. The stage lights bore down on her, unforgiving. And some of the same reporters who once praised her, who quoted her sound bites, posted her memes, looked away, eyes averted. In the midst of the crowd, there was one moment of silence that stood out. An Ohio pastor put his hands together in front of him, bowed his head, and said nothing. He didn't need to. Karoline Leavitt coughed, her eyes locked on Jen Psaki. Jen, she said quietly but firmly, you call me a puppet, but puppets don't tell the truth. Traitors hide it. An elderly woman in the front row, who wore an American flag pin, was crying and wiping away tears. The seriousness of those words hit hard. Psaki tried to go on speaking, her voice trembling. This isn't fair. But Karoline was just getting started. Turning to the audience, her gaze swept over shocked, outraged, and dismayed faces. "I did not wish it to come to this," she began, her own voice controlled and thick with meaning. "But we cannot fix this country if we keep protecting those who would seek to destroy it from inside." She did not gesture toward Psaki, but every sentence burned like an arrow fired straight into her. "When America was attacked by deception of the media," Karoline continued, "you said nothing. When the people needed a voice, you gave them scripted responses. And when it came down to the wire, you walked away from those who had believed in you, on the values you indicated you held." The room was quiet, transfixed. Karoline's face softened as she looked at a young man on whose lap lay a family photograph. "Is that your sister?" she asked softly. He nodded. "She lost her job due to Biden's inflation," Karoline spoke softly, "while individuals like Jen Psaki kept things hidden behind slick TV speeches. That's the reason that I no longer have the capacity to be quiet." Whispers became claps. The claps became louder and louder until the entire room stood to its feet in a standing ovation. Psaki looked towards the exit, a look of someone who has been caught in a storm she believed that she was in charge of, but was not. But Karoline was not finished. When the applause subsided, a refreshed vigor swept through the space. The back door creaked open, and President Donald Trump stepped in. Trump was quiet at first. He simply strode down the center aisle with slow, measured paces, his expression unchanging. Cameras hastened to capture the moment. The audience leaned forward in their seats, the air caught in their throats. Jen Psaki braced, her shoulders taut. Karoline Leavitt moved aside a step or two, relinquishing the microphone to Trump. She nodded to him respectfully, her face calm and unwavering. Trump looked at the crowd, then looked for a fleeting moment at Psaki before advancing towards the microphone. "You know," he began, his tone low but clear, "I was backstage, and I have never been more proud of a press secretary than I am now." Karoline didn't smile. No triumph on her face, just a firm determination. Trump put a hand on her shoulder. "Loyalty is not blind obedience," he said. "It's believing in what's right, even when it's unpleasant, even when it hurts." And then he turned wholly to Psaki. "I trusted you once, Jen, but you lost my trust. And the worst part isn't what you did to me, it's what you did to the American people." Psaki dropped her eyes, staring at the floor. "You called Karoline a puppet," Trump continued. "But today, she revealed you, without so much as a touch." The crowd went wild. Some stood applauding, others wept quietly. The mood had changed, and now the room was Karoline Leavitt's. A dense hush followed the clapping. It wasn't emptiness, it was respect. The kind of hush in which nobody will move because they know history is being made. All of the major TV networks had interrupted their programs to broadcast this moment. Twitter streams were flooded. Live hits soared into the millions by the second. Jen Psaki came to a halt, her eyes wide, blinking, as if she wanted to turn back time. But the cameras were no longer in her face. Karoline was standing at the podium, Trump standing behind her, folded arms. "America is not perfect," she said to them, sweeping the room with her eyes and then directly into the live stream camera. "We've been hurt. We've been lied to, but nothing cuts deeper than betrayal by someone we once trusted." She didn't even look back at Psaki. "And when someone chooses the praise of enemies over loyalty to the truth," Karoline continued, her voice stern, "they become less than their own shadow." A faint cry was let out somewhere in the room. Jen Psaki's eyes snapped to the door once more. Still, she didn't move. Some force within her held her fast. Karoline lifted the USB drive once more. "This isn't personal," she whispered. "It pains, but it must be done. America can't even begin to heal if we hide those who have injured it." A hush settled once again. A few individuals in the audience wiped away tears. Some others just sat in silence. But the story, it wasn't finished. In the back of the room, an elderly woman, using a cane for support, began to make her way to the front with the help of her son. The room instinctively opened up around her. Karoline recognized her and paused. Her tone softened. "Would you like to speak?" The woman nodded and nervously grasped the mic, her hands slightly shaking. But when she began to speak, her voice was a shock for its power. "I worked 3 shifts a day to provide for my family during Biden's presidency," she said. "And I never lost hope until I saw Jen Psaki on TV lying about the suffering we were going through." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. She turned her attention to Psaki. "You spoke of transparency, of being on the side of the people. But when the media attacked you, you stood with them instead." Psaki lowered her head. She couldn't meet the woman's eye. And the woman addressed Karoline. "You remind me of something I thought this country had lost. Honesty." Karoline blinked angrily. That hurt more than she'd expected. The woman's son gently touched her shoulder and whispered, "That's enough, Mom." Karoline returned to the podium, her voice now quiet, but full of weight. "America doesn't demand perfect leaders. America is begging for honest ones." Even Psaki's former allies, seated just rows away, bowed their heads. Some stared at their notepads, others wiped their eyes. What started as a press event had turned into something much more. This wasn't politics anymore. It was a reckoning, a moment of raw truth, brought through suffering, through tears, and the courage of a room that had finally hit its breaking point. And for Jen Psaki, so scripted, so practiced, there was no line left to read, no explanation, just the silence of a woman collapsing under the accumulated weight of unspoken shame. "We lose," said Karoline, her voice unbroken, "not because our enemies are strong, but because some of us value comfort over conviction." The crowd collectively gasped. Jen Psaki, now just a presence at the periphery of the stage, looked as if she wanted to disappear. Her knuckles went white as she gripped the rim of a chair. Leavitt stood, addressing now the room and the millions at home. "This is not about revenge. It's about truth. It's about deciding, finally, who we are and what we believe in." She nodded not at Psaki, but to the symbolic weight she now carried. "America is tired of performance, of eloquent betrayals in the guise of strategy, of words nicely spoken that mean everything except what they must mean." A reporter yelled out, "You're saying that there is no redemption for people like Jen?" Leavitt paused, then answered that question directly. "No," she said. "I'm saying redemption starts with confession. Not excuses, not spin, just truth." A silence followed, thick with weight. Psaki parted her lips but could not speak. The mic no longer belonged to her. The stage no longer belonged to her. Not tonight. A couple of onlookers applauded, then more. Before long, the entire auditorium rang out with applause, not for shame, but for truth. Trump stood alongside Leavitt, arms folded, slightly nodding. Outside, America hummed. Cable TV cycled the standoff repeatedly. Social media trended with hashtags such as Truthstorm, Leavitt Unleashed, and Psaki Exposed. Inside, as cameras zoomed in on Karoline Leavitt, she didn't smile, she didn't smirk, she just looked straight ahead and spoke what had to be said. "If we're to rescue this country," she told us, "we don't need perfect voices. We need brave ones." And then, nothing. A silence that came like the end of one era and the beginning of another. You stripped her bare with truth, and not with bitterness. "I'm glad you did it, Nicholas." Leavitt folded the letter carefully, holding it pressed against her chest. A flush of heat enveloped her, a quiet assurance in the tempest she'd created. This wasn't hers alone. It was for all who'd had faith in something greater than politics, honesty, courage, and the hope of a better tomorrow. She returned to the stage just as proceedings were resumed. The audience, though still absorbing the seriousness of what had transpired, listened attentively. Cameras rolled again, recording every utterance. Leavitt cleared her throat and spoke again with fresh calm. "We are at a fork in the road. The decision is not left or right. It's between truth and silence, courage and complacency. The soul of this country rests on the shoulders of those who will lead through the fire." The room fell silent. Even Psaki froze, her gaze fixed somewhere outside the here and now. Leavitt glanced at the crowd one last time. This is only the beginning. Jen Psaki laboriously stood up from her chair. No claps of hands rang out. Nobody rose, not even her former allies. She glided along the middle aisle like a phantom unobserved. People avoided meeting her gaze as she moved. She came to the door of exit, paused, maybe waiting for someone to shout out, call out, even whisper her name, but there was nothing, and out of this nothingness came remorse with the fury of a storm. Leavitt stood near the stage, unsmiling, serene. She did not grin or taunt. She simply tilted her head. One of the small girls in the crowd, not more than 10 years old, tugged on her mother's arm and said, "Why is that woman going away?" The mother sat down, whispering, "Because she lost the truth." Leavitt pushed the heavy door, stepping into the coldness of the outside air. No microphones, no cameras, no spotlight, just the echo of her footsteps and the door closing behind her. A chapter in her life had come to a close, but Leavitt's story was still being written by the people. Following the final speech, Leavitt slowly walked through the audience, shaking hands, smiling diplomatically, listening. An older employee, walking on a cane, his head topped by a worker's cap, stood waiting. His jacket was covered with a union pin and a photo of his family. When Leavitt approached him, he did not speak first. He just stared into her eyes. Then he extended his hand. "You spoke for all of us today," he said, his voice trembling. "And I've waited years to hear truth like that." Leavitt gripped his hand tightly. "Thank you for your service, sir." "No, young lady," he said. "Thank you for serving us." His eyes welled up. He glanced away, but then hesitated. "Don't ever change. We can't lose another honest leader." Leavitt nodded, hard swallowing. She stood there stock still, watching him move slowly away from her, and then spotted it. A glimpse of hope that burst through the crowd, ready to shine brightly again. He turned away and halted, then looked back once more. "Don't ever change," he breathed softly. "We can't lose another honest leader." Leavitt nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing up and down as he swallowed. She let him back away, slowly, the weight of his words sinking deep within her. The crowd around her swirled, a low rumble of rekindled hope spreading like flames. Outside, the evening sky went dark purple and gold. Leavitt stepped off the curb, inhaled the coolness of the night. This was bigger than her, bigger than politics. It was the beginning of something real, something permanent. And as the city lights came on, one by one, Karoline Leavitt knew the fight for truth had only just started. City lights blurred by as the SUV glided effortlessly down the deserted streets. Karoline's thoughts reeled, questions, dreams, and nightmares, all tangled in the weight of the day. She knew the road to come would be hard, filled with conflicts she had not yet imagined. Yet for the first time, she felt a spark of something wonderful. Purpose. Inside, a searing resolve was smoldering. This was no longer politics or headlines. This was a matter of a nation's soul and the truth it so desperately required. The journey ahead was only beginning, and Karoline Leavitt was ready to walk through fire. Leavitt smoothed the letter into a neat fold and looked up into the eyes of her staff. "We have an obligation larger than any election," she said softly. "This is about repairing a country that's lost its way." Sarah nodded. "And people are listening, Karoline. They're hungry for truth and for leaders who care. Leavitt's words grew stronger. Then we give it to them. Not words, but action. We stand with the forgotten, the overlooked, the silent. The SUV continued to move into the night, the city landmarks casting long shadows, reminders of history that had braved storms before. Karoline was aware of the weight and the promise of what lay ahead. "This is just the beginning," she breathed, because what happened today was not a moment. It was a movement. At 1:34 a.m., with lights out and streets quiet, Leavitt sat quietly alone in a small prayer room at the press secretary's residence. No staff, no noise, she and the gentle hum of the night. She lit a small candle, folded her hands, and closed her eyes. She prayed for neither power nor popularity. She murmured quietly, "God, keep me honest. Let me carry this the right way, and if I forget why I started, take it from me." She sat there for a few minutes. No tempest, no booming voice, just peace. Then the door creaked open. Trump appeared in a jacket and slippers. "Knew I'd find you here." Leavitt smiled quietly. Couldn't sleep. Trump entered, sat beside her, and looked at the cross. "Think they're ready?" Leavitt stared ahead. "I think they're starving for truth." Trump stood, nodded. "Then take it to them." And with that, they left the prayer room, not as politicians, but as warriors for something bigger than politics, something America had all but forgotten until now. The online community buzzed on social media. Leavitt didn't read it. She just held on to her husband's letter, feeling the weight of responsibility, not for herself, but for those who were waiting for a leader who was not afraid to fight for them. The next morning, Karoline Leavitt was seated in a live interview with America's most famous journalist, Emily Harper, on a network that millions watched. "Mr. Leavitt," Harper began, "how did you feel when Jen Psaki called you a puppet on stage?" Leavitt leaned back, unflustered but firm. "I was sad." "For her?" Harper's eyebrow rose. "Sad," Leavitt said, "because I looked at someone who had been press secretary, who had stood alongside an administration, now reduced to bitterness and hubris. She valued applause from the wrong people over fidelity to the truth." Harper nodded slowly. "And which of your lines shut her up?" Leavitt paused. The room leaned in. "I said, you accuse me of being a puppet for standing with Trump, but you sold your soul to shake hands with those who hate your values." The home audience erupted online. Social media lit up with hashtags. Harper smiled, choked up almost. "Miss Leavitt, you may have changed the course of the conservative movement." Leavitt looked straight into the camera. "Not changed, reminded." The interview ended, but something else had just begun. The people's fire had been rekindled. After the interview, Leavitt returned home briefly to visit her husband and son before heading back to Washington, D.C. As she tucked her not-yet-one-year-old son, Nico, into bed, he babbled, "Mommy, why did that lady say you're not good?" Leavitt quieted. The innocent question stung more than any headline. She sat down beside him, pulling him close. "Because sometimes when you do the right thing, the wrong people try to make you look weak." Nico's eyes shone. "But you didn't yell. You didn't get mad." Leavitt smiled gently. "Because real strength doesn't need to yell. It tells the truth, even if the voice shakes." Nico hugged her tight. "You're my superhero." Leavitt swallowed hard, kissing his forehead. "No, sweetheart, you're my superhero." As she turned off the light, she lingered at the door. The weight of Psaki's insult and America's pain pressed on her shoulders. But love was there too. And with it, she knew she had to return to the fire. For every parent, every child still waiting for someone to fight for them. Meanwhile, Psaki sat alone in a hotel room outside the event. No interviews, no invitations. Her phone rang occasionally, calls of cancellation for the most part. She turned on the TV. Leavitt's interview was replayed. The words rang out. You sold your soul to shake hands with those who despise your values. Psaki shut off the TV, tossing the remote aside. She looked at a framed photo of her and Biden from their White House days, then faced the mirror. No longer the proud woman of years past, just an empty shadow. She picked up the phone, calling an old advisor from her press secretary days. They're done with you, the voice said. You're not the future. You're just the past. Psaki did not stir. For once, she had no defense. The betrayal that she thought that she could keep hidden had come back to consume her. The people had cast their votes, and they voted for Karoline Leavitt. In a town in Pennsylvania, schoolteacher Linda Carter stood before her 7th grade civics class. The class had just watched clips of Leavitt's speech and interview. Class, how did you feel watching this? She asked softly. A shy girl in the back of the room spoke up. She made me feel like somebody actually cares about regular people. A boy who had a father with 2 jobs spoke up. She didn't try to sound smart, she just told the truth. Carter nodded, her eyes welling. That's leadership. No screaming, no pretending. It's standing up for something, even when other people quit. On the classroom TV, Leavitt's voice boomed, "Cowards flee the flame. Leaders walk through it." One of the students muttered under her breath, "I wish my dad heard that before he quit his job last year." There was a silence. In that small classroom, Leavitt wasn't just the press secretary. She was a hope symbol, a courage symbol, and a politics done right symbol, unforgettable to all. In the Capitol, Relief Sarah stood before Leavitt's office door and knocked. "Come in," Leavitt said, sipping coffee. Sarah came in, eyes red. "I must say this." Leavitt looked up, concerned. "I used to believe in Psaki. I defended her, stood by her. Even when she turned her back on the truth, I made excuses." Leavitt simply listened. "But after what you did yesterday," Sarah paused, voice breaking, "you reminded me why I got into this. Not for fame or media, but to help people." Karoline Leavitt stood, moved forward, and laid a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We've all trusted the wrong person. What matters is not staying there." Sarah wiped away tears. "You didn't just expose. You healed a wound in us we didn't know was broken." Leavitt nodded slightly. "Then it was worth it." There were other staff waiting outside the door. They weren't there for a meeting. They were there because they believed again. Late that evening, Leavitt was summoned to the Oval Office. President Donald Trump stayed at the window looking out onto the south lawn of the White House. He didn't turn right away. "You were tremendous, Karoline." Leavitt stepped forward cautiously. "Thank you, Mr. President." Trump turned, and Leavitt was surprised. The man renowned for being hard-nosed had tears in his eyes. "You reminded me of something I almost forgot," Trump said with seriousness. "This fight isn't for us. It's for them, the hurting, the forgotten, and the heart of America." Leavitt lowered her head. "They need someone honest, someone who doesn't leave them when it gets tough." Trump nodded. "And they discovered that man yesterday. They embraced not as politicians but as patriots, bound by reality, loyalty, and love for a country that had nearly lost its soul. The White House was not a war zone. It was home, for the first time in years." The next day, Leavitt sat at her window when a hand-delivered marked urgent envelope thudded onto the desk. No postal mark, just a scrawled message in ballpoint. Emma L., 10, Texas. Leavitt opened it carefully. The script was unsteady, childish, but the words were acid-tipped. "Dear Miss Leavitt, my mom used to trust Ms. Psaki. We even had a poster of her TV show, but after she lied on TV, my mom told me she lost hope. Mom cried yesterday when she listened to you speak. I have only seen her cry once, Grandpa's passing. Mom told me you reminded her what we are. She said she is proud to be American once again. Thank you for getting up when others were scared. You're not a puppet. You're a warrior. Love, Emma. Leavitt folded the letter against her chest. No cameras, no observers, but tears fell. This was why she struggled, not for power, but for Emma and all the silenced voices like hers. As the nation rallied around Leavitt, Jen Psaki fell out of sight. Her interviews were quietly canceled, her staff disbanded, conference invites. One evening, in the corner of an empty New York diner, Psaki sat alone, phone face down, plate untouched. A couple came in, spotted her, and quickly chose another table. She stirred the coffee, remorse weighing more by the minute. She remembered the stage, the lights, the confidence she once had. But now those recollections tasted bitter. The most terrible part? Leavitt hadn't annihilated her with rage. She destroyed her with truth. Steady, calm truth. Psaki muttered to herself, "I underestimated her, but it was too late. The tide had turned. The people had spoken, and there was no going back." In Washington, President Trump requested a national speech. Standing behind him was Leavitt, not as a sidekick, but as an equal. Trump began first. What we saw yesterday was not a moment. It was a movement, and it's headed by the woman standing beside me. And then Trump stepped aside. Leavitt stepped up to the podium. She glanced at the teleprompter, then turned it off. "I don't need a script to tell the truth," she said. "America is tired of pretense, tired of smooth lies and silent cowards. We want courage restored. We want truth restored. We want home restored." She paused, her voice trembling. "If being with a president that keeps America first makes me a puppet, then call me one with honor, because I'd rather be a puppet for the truth than a master of betrayal." The room broke into tears. Others wept. Millions of Americans all over the country felt something they hadn't in a very long time. Trust. The future had arrived, and its name was Karoline Leavitt. The story of Karoline Leavitt's defense of Jen Psaki at the National Press Club speaks volumes about the profound element of American society today: political polarization, the desire for truth, and the power of one individual's bravery to make a difference in the world today. As Americans wrestle with debates about biased media, economic crises, and distrust of government, this story offers a valuable lesson in standing for truth at a cost. Leavitt's acerbic wit pierced the silence and sparked a renewed hope. "Jen, if loyalty to the truth makes me a puppet, then what are you?" Leavitt's words not only exposed Psaki's contradictions, but also rekindled faith in her audience, from the woman who lost her job to 10-year-old Emma. The letter from Leavitt's husband and calls from ordinary citizens underscore that true leadership comes not from fame, but from connecting with others' real pain. Trump's advice to Leavitt, "Don't let their love change you," serves as a powerful reminder to hold fast to core values amid public pressure. The lesson for today's America is clear. Everyone can learn from Leavitt's example to face criticism with truth and sincerity, rather than evasion or personal attacks. Whether you're an employee standing against workplace injustice or a parent fighting for your community, draw inspiration from Leavitt's courage. She openly shared Psaki's clip to be transparent, but was never arrogant. She listened to the people. And while Leavitt prayed in that small room, honesty is the compass that guides in a divided society. This lesson teaches us: tell the truth with courage, touch with heart, and never lose sight of why you started. Subscribe to the channel to share truth and hope, like Karoline Leavitt. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.